What's your name? And then tell us your story.
Barbara Bondurant Pelot. And this has been my church since my birth. I was born to my parents who lived on Kingston Pike in a 400-acre farm. And they came to the church, the old church at Concord, kind of across from the railroad track. We had to look through the Baptist church to be able to see the Methodist church, but we managed. And that has always been my church, although they took me to Fountain City Methodist Church to be christened. Now, my dad's church had been Fountain City Methodist, and he loved it very much, apparently. And so he apparently did that for his mother so that she could be there for that. But otherwise, Concord has been my church. And my grandfather and mother were very active in the church. My mother was Evelyn Boring before she became a Bondurant. And her parents, Annie and Robert Boring, were very active in terms of the church. And my grandfather was on the school board in Knox County for 20 years. So my grandmother had been a Quaker. Her mother was Margaret B. Hackney, who was the pastor of the Quaker Church at Friendsville for 50 years before and through and after the Civil War. So she was an amazing woman. And I was blessed to be old enough as a child that Grandmama came to live with us the last few years of her life. And I remember her very, very vividly. And when Grandmama was in our presence, no one spoke anything but thee and thou and thine. And we really respected her faith and her customs. So I feel very close to the Quaker faith, simply because it was such a it was such a sweet, lovely way to live and love your neighbor. And it was so interesting how they dealt with the Civil War and so on. So I had that good opportunity as a child. And then my grandparents, the Borings, had become members here and had always been very active in the church. And so it was just the church has kind of been the mainstay of our lives as a family. And I've been blessed since to become a Pelot. And now as a Pelot, I'm still in the church, and I dragged that little Pelot boy over here, and he joined the church the week before we got married because I wanted him to be a member of the church before I married him, although he was a Crossville boy, and the Methodist church was not his home church, but their family was very active in their church. So it's been a wonderful life where the church has just been the kind of the anchor point for us. And with a personality like mine, I've needed that anchor point. Yes. So, because this little girl had a temper, this little girl had to be reminded who she was. This little girl had to sit and think about it many hours. The more I thought about it, the more angry I got. So that didn't quite work with me as a child, but Mother didn't understand that. Anyway, it's just been an interesting life growing up. And the people that I have known who were members of this church and who kept this church alive and thriving and so meaningful to the community were people I will never forget, thankfully. I can forget what I'm supposed to do today, but I won't forget some of those people. I've just had a wonderful life in the church, as any of our children can tell you, our grandchildren can tell you. is still just so important to us. And we look forward to Sunday morning, and we look forward to Wednesday nights. We look forward to the opportunities to come together and be here. Now, has the church changed? Oh, yes. Little church was just a little community church, sweet little church. We took care of each other. We took care of the people in the community that we knew had needs. It didn't matter if they were members of our church. It didn't matter who they were. And we have had wonderful ministers who have understood that we were trying to let our Christian faith live every day in our lives as we encountered our neighbors. And sometimes that was challenging, but that was what we were reminded very well to do. And the leadership of this church has always been very faithful in trying to be a church on Sunday, but primarily a church that goes out and is maybe more active Monday through Saturday. So I've been grateful for this church, very grateful. It's given me so many opportunities. As a child, we were allowed to speak, and we were allowed to be very involved in church services and have little parts to go up and speak before the congregation. And that was so nice for us. And I think we grew up as children thinking that we were a part of the service. And we were very lacking in people who had all the talents that were needed to do what our little growing church and surviving church was doing. And so we didn't have anyone to play the piano when I was a teenager. And unfortunately for the church, but fortunately for me, it was like Barbara. So Barbara had to learn to play hymns, and it was wonderful. Mother was in the choir, and it was just what you did. And I was so glad that I had that opportunity. It was wonderful. The church was so glad that I went away to college, and suddenly someone moved in who was a marvelous pianist, and her husband directed the music. And from there on, the church program in the church really began to take off. So when I took off, the church really began to have a music program. So it's just interesting. I remember they bought this organ suddenly my senior year. And, well, of course, there was nobody to play the organ, so it was Barbara. And so it was the next thing I did. But anyway, I loved MYF. That was an incredible experience. It was just beginning to be, you might say, a church-wide thing. And we began to go to other communities. And I remember going to Oak Ridge and going to Maryville and going to other areas that I wouldn't have gotten to go to. I remember going to church camp. And I just remember that, that was really the highlight of my life, was the activities of the church. So this church has meant so much to me. Now, I would love to think that I reflect those wonderful opportunities as much as they meant to me, but I try every day. So I love Concord. And when the decision was made to move out to the highway, which is where we are now. We're not really on the highway, but we are a little bit more prominently located. It was a very difficult decision, and many people were not very excited about that because they had been walking to church, and it was just kind of like in their back door. But it was a decision that if this church was going to grow, and we were going to be able to have the ministry that we were seeking to have and felt called to have, then we would need to be where we could be more centrally located. And that move, my dad became extremely involved, of course, when he married my mother. And so that's where the bonder and influence began to really be involved. He was chair of the building committee, and our family was very involved in the decision to build the church here. And I'm so thankful we did. It has just been absolutely amazing to see this church grow and see this church not just, it's not Sunday morning only. Really, what I think about with Concord United Methodist is I see that it's what we do during the week, not just what we do for a few hours on Sunday, but what we mean to others during the week that is so compelling to me. Now, I went away to college, as I said, to Memphis. Was not in a Methodist church. I was. Eventually, I went to the Presbyterian church a brief time. Then I went to a Methodist church as well. But the churches there did not have the ministries that we do. It was a Sunday church. And our church, what happens in this building and what happens outside this building during the week is remarkable, just remarkable. We bring so many people in who are not members of our church, but they are people who have needs that our church wants so much to reach out and give them a hand. If they need a place for their parent to be during the week so they can go to work, but that parent is unfortunately dealing with dementia, they can come here and they can kiss that person goodbye in the morning, and they can leave them with a delightful group that they're going to spend the day with and doing a lot of activities and come back at the end of the day and everybody's happy. They're happy to go home, but they're happy to come again tomorrow. So, that's just one example, just one of the many ministries that this church can offer. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of it. I know that we have had some changes in our Methodist faith. And I know that that's heartbreaking to me. And to me, it's unfortunate. And I hope that once again, we'll all come together. And that's not a conversation for today, but that's my prayer. Because I truly believe that in remaining the United Methodist Church, we are doing what God would have us do. I do not want to be a judge on someone else's life and their circumstances. I'll leave that to God. All I need to do is to be a friend and be there for them. And I think we do that at Concord. It's my prayer we'll continue to do that at Concord. And my goodness, we're getting ready to dig another hole out here and put another great big old building in and do something else, which is very important. We can have more people come and have a place to stay during the week. We can give our young people more room to have their programs. And we can find a way to bring more people to this wonderful faith that we've all found here at Concord. this when this building was designed by Bill Dunlap, who is one of our members, and he was so thrilled to be the person asked to design the architecture for the building. He envisioned this beautiful stained glass window, which was extremely contemporary in design and very different than anything Concord had ever seen, but just magnificent. And there was going to be a question about how would we pay for that window. And it was just, we were so excited because it was an opportunity for us to dedicate that window to my mother and dad. So my brother and I, Jack, and his wife, and my husband and I, Nib, as you know him, Dr. Reuben Pelot. Otherwise, Nib and I decided that we would like to give that window to the church and dedicate it to our parents. And I see that window every day or every time I come to the church. And it just makes me think of Mother and Daddy and how much they love this church and how much it meant to our family. And I'm so glad that we had that opportunity. And I'm so thankful that Billy had that vision for that window, which has been so beautiful and so much of our advertising and so much of our presence in this community. So we do have something here that is very close to our hearts. We have been so blessed at Concord to have the most wonderful pastors. At a time when there were not that many pastors in this conference or this district. But we have been so very blessed to have pastors who really could see opportunities that we needed to take advantage of. And I so remember when suddenly missions were introduced to us, and that the thought of little Concord down by there was no lake there when I was a little girl. I was 7 years old before the water came up into the lake. I remember watching it on Sundays, a little bit more water every Sunday. But before that, it was just across the railroad track, nothing there. And so suddenly we had this gorgeous lake. But anyway, no, the pastors were just amazing how they began to introduce the possibilities that we could reach beyond Concord and that we could not just read about something, but we could be actually involved in it. And I remember that my husband Nib and I went on the very first mission trip that the church took, and we went to Costa Rica. And it was just the most wonderful experience. Came back home, wore some of the Costa Rican rig, and just enjoyed so much sharing what we had done there. Now, we did dental work in Costa Rica, but there were many mission efforts that involved other people on the team. And then they wanted to have another team go, and Nib and I could not wait to go on that team. But by the time the third team went, other people wanted to go, and that kind of pushed us out. But our children, a couple of our children got to go. So it was a wonderful opportunity to begin to involve not only the adults, but the young people in missions, which were missions away from just our area. And then we were serving lunches uptown at the at the Knoxville Area Rescue Ministry, and that was wonderful. And then one day, someone started to put something in somebody's hand, and they said, "No, no, no, no." And they said, "What's wrong? This is wonderful. You'll love this. So-and-so made this." And they said, "No, no, no, I've got a tooth. It's going to," and they said, "Pelot, you need to take care of this person. They've got a toothache." And so not only did we take care of that person, but we, as a church, got together and we were able to get the dental supply companies to help us. The church members all came down and we were able to operate a dental clinic downtown Knoxville for the people just lined up on the street. I would go out on the street and I'd stand on the street and triage them, and we would bring them in and treat them for whatever they needed. And they were able then to work. They were able then to eat and keep their health up. So it was just, this church began to reach out to those in so many situations where they would have had no one. But it was just so exciting to be a part of this church's growth at that point in time. Now, of course, it's just amazing what we do, what the young folks do.